So before you start asking questions, we'd like to make one announcement at least. As you know that we have already mentioned that there will be a mini budget that is going to be delivered. Our work has already started. We've already had started consultations. We were in Nandi over the weekend. We did start off with Nandi because obviously Nandi is one of those towns, soon to be city, that has been hardest hit because the tourism sector obviously is centered around Nandi area. A lot of people who live in Nandi area are in fact engaged directly or indirectly in the tourism sector. And we have also started some meetings with some members of the business community, and we'll be also officially getting public submissions in respect of the mini budget. We're currently looking at a date of 17th of March to have the mini budget delivered, just to be firmed up, but there is an indicative date of the mini budget itself. As you know that when we did deliver the budget last year for the full fiscal year, we did say that should there be any changes in the economy in terms of the borders opening up, or should there be further restrictions, etc., that there may be a need to deliver a mini budget halfway through, in particular after doing assessments. So this is a result of that, and we'll of course be looking at some adjustments in terms of the budget that was already announced last year in July for this fiscal year. So I just wanted to highlight that to you so you're aware that there will be a mini budget that will be delivered, and we already have started work on that.
So what are some of the things that make the government to decide on the mini budget?
As I announced in the budget last year, when we delivered the budget, that for example, your variables can change. At that point in time, nobody knew when the borders would open, how long it would be closed for. Of course, in terms of your revenue streams, in terms of your expenditure streams, they do get affected depending on how long the borders are closed for, when do they open, how soon do they open. So they are the most obvious ones that we had announced that would have an impact on our need to, or otherwise, deliver a mini budget.
So just what have you done to manage the debt distress issue as raised by the ADB?
Well, it's not a debt distress, as you say. I mean, the ADB has highlighted the debt situation of many countries. Unfortunately, the media organizations, even like yours, tend to focus on that. But you have not looked at, for example, the cost of debt. The loan that we signed here today is 0.01%. One of the tranches are payable over 40 years with a 10-year grace period. Essentially, if you do your calculations, you're looking at about 60% of that, in fact, being a grant. Because when you borrow money at that cost or that price, obviously, over a 40-year period, it tends to become a grant, or at least part of it. The reality is that what is the alternative to that? COVID-19, as you know, halved government revenue overnight. The border shut down, and of course, revenue streams dried up. A lot of people lost their jobs. If in that particular period, if government, for example, did not go out and borrow, it would have meant that the economy would have further contracted. If the economy further contracted and did not have any inflow of foreign currency, your ability to make your repayments in the purchase of goods from overseas, because we continue to buy goods from overseas, would have been extremely limited. It would have led to a devaluation. That's the last thing you want, because that would have been extremely difficult and would have caused enormous socioeconomic issues, in particular for those people who would have lost jobs, people who did not have jobs, for those people who are on the margins of society. So unfortunately, that kind of analysis that you've just stated, which a lot of people focus on, some politicians focus on, they don't look at the full picture. They don't tell you what would have been the impact if, for example, government had not borrowed in those particular circumstances. And of course, you need to look at why was the money borrowed and where was the money used. So our ability to, for example, provide $500 million worth of assistance to members of our society, whether it's in terms of unemployment benefits channeled through FNPF, $185 million, the 362 rounds, the $90, the $50, the market vendors' fees being paid, the taxi drivers' renewal license, etc. All of those things, the GP services, actually has put money in people's pockets or help them defray their day-to-day costs or giving them services that has made their life easier. So, for example, free education was not stopped, social welfare payments was not stopped, nor were the amounts reduced. So that's how you got to look at it. You got to look at it in that context.
So will the mini budget be for a 12-month period, bearing in mind that we could have elections later on in the year?
Sorry?
The mini budget, will it be for a 12-month period?
No, mini budget by its very term means that it's for a short period of time. Our fiscal year, as you know, starts from 1st of August till the 31st of July in the following year. So this mini budget would take us up to 31st of July this year.
I'm just curious because politicians, political elements have already said that the government ministers are going out, sort of handing out freebies and what have you. What would you say that to their comments if there were provisions in the mini budget to assist people and then they were to turn around and say, look, the mini budget is just designed to lure voters?
So when did they say we're giving freebies?
There have been comments that they're saying that the ministers are going out, you yourself were in the north, and there are comments that very soon, leading up to the elections, there will be handouts going out.
Well, the visit to the north was not a freebie. The visit to the north was already announced last year. And as you know that we had borrowed monies to lay the the cable that linked to the Southern Cross cable or to land in one level. And that particular loan facility was financed by the World Bank. We had some leftover monies, which World Bank wanted us to use, of course, and we had the okay to use it, the approval to. And we used that funding to actually connect people to internet. That's not a freebie, that's actually empowering people. That was announced last year. In fact, we have had a program in respect of what we call connecting the unconnected. We have been setting up telecenters throughout Fiji in schools. It goes back to about 4 or 5 years. So it's an ongoing initiative, it's an ongoing program, it's a philosophical approach as to how we need to empower people. So the fact that we have now schools and teachers who don't have to travel 10 kilometers to access internet, who don't have to travel 10 kilometers to access a printer or to make a phone call, is actually empowering not just them, but also the students. And wherever there's been a community that lives around the school, for example, villages and various other living areas, people actually can go into the school compound and access Wi-Fi. So somebody who may be growing Yangona is able to know what price he will get if he goes to Sabu Sabu as opposed to going to Lambasa or going to Nambuwalu. That is actually empowering. It's increasing the productive capacity of these farmers. It also means that they get a better price for their crops. That's not a freebie. So people actually, call it a freebie. Obviously, are quite silly, and it's again an election gimmick by themselves. So, if you look at what we are doing, it's all a continuation of the policies that we put in place, either by the Bainimarama government or the Fiji First government. It's just a natural extension of what we have been doing for a number of years.
So one of the NF leader, Professor Vimal Prasad, has recently said, through a statement, that government is drunk on power and is in election mode and abusing valuable state resources. 50% of our population struggles to put food on the table. He says that they have received many calls informing him that cabinet ministers were having telephone sessions in their respective communities.
So what's the problem?
I've seen. So he's just raising the concern that government is drunk on power and going on.
Do you think we are drunk on power? Are you saying that, or you just parroting that?
I'm not parroting.
Yes, you are, because you have not analyzed it. So you're saying I'm drunk on power, or
He
government
said
ministers.
he's received a lot of calls. So
Can I just finish what I'm saying?
Yes.
So what I'm saying is that you are essentially just parroting what he's saying. It does not mean that we are drunk on power. By having community consultations, I don't see how that can be being drunk on power. And it's quite a silly proposition. He's received phone calls. We don't have any verification of that. We've known Honorable Prasad not necessarily to be always have verifiable statements made. So, you see, again, I've said this before. In this particular point in time, the media really should be a bit more discerning and use your intellect, rather than saying he said that, she said that, and then you respond to he said that, she said that. I mean, I think it's not really very productive to do so, nor does it in any way help the citizens. If government ministers are going out and listening directly from members of the public as to what their concerns are, what are the issues, that's actually a very positive thing. I know in other instances, people like him have said, oh, you don't know what's actually happening to the real people. So now when we actually are going out, he's saying we should not be doing that. So you see, this is a person who's been extremely inconsistent, like very much the PAP leader who he is following.
So you bring up the PAP leader, Mr. Rambuka has also made comments with regards to the Prime Minister and his health. Come out to say that people need to know what's going on with the Prime Minister. Any response to that?
The comments by Rambuka is very un-Fijian, extremely un-Fijian. It lacks decorum, it lacks finesse. All of you are aware that you've been to press conferences we've had, or statements we've actually issued to the media, where we have actually told as to what procedure the Honourable Prime Minister has gone through. We have informed that he is actually which city he is in, and we've also informed members of the public that he is recuperating and that we should respect the privacy, his privacy, and of course his family's privacy, so he can actually recuperate, and he's actually doing well. I've also mentioned that I've communicated with him, and I communicate with him on a regular basis. So this type of comment just to get on the front page of Fiji Times, actually, I think is very distasteful. And it shows a complete lack of disrespect for an individual's privacy when they're going through a medical procedure. He, of course, is the Prime Minister of this country, and we, of course, have now gone on more than 2 occasions basically stating what his health position is, what procedure he's been through. We've actually stated what procedure he's been through, and which hospital, and which city he's been in. So I cannot understand why he's saying that we're keeping it a state secret. I think essentially, see, politicians like that like to be relevant. The point is that what the Fiji Village journalist stated about Honourable Biman Prasad and Rambuka is that none of them actually have made any statements on their policies. There's absolutely an absence of policies. They have no policy on ITC, they have no policy on the pandemic, they have no policy on education. Rambuka in fact said, I made education free. And then of course when it was pointed out to him that it was not free, then he said, oh yes, I meant, this. So again, there's a lack of inconsistency. And it goes to show that if a person he's not even in Parliament, but if he's outside of Parliament, can make that type of inconsistent statements, imagine what he will do if he ever, God forbid, gets into government. That's what the members of the public need to understand. That here you have politicians, some in Parliament, who are making so many inconsistent statements, which goes to show what type of leaders there would be if they ever form government, God forbid. So I think this is a good opportunity for members of the public to realize when these people make statements, and they are given the opportunity by certain media organizations to make very silly statements, inconsistent statements, which really should be picked upon. Some media organizations, of course, are pointing out the inconsistencies. And that is really the job of a media organization. It's not for people to simply come and parrot what somebody said, and then we have to respond to that. I mean, anybody can see that I'm standing here and I'm not drunk. It's a very basic saying we're drunk with power. It's a very fundamental issue. So again, Rambuka is trying to be relevant, making statements on the Honourable Prime Minister. No decorum, no finesse, no respect, very, very un-Fijian.
So I just want to go back to the budget with the consultation with the businesses in Nandi. What concerns have they raised which you'll consider in the mini budget?
The consultation we had actually with members of the public. So we went to a number of areas around Nandi. We've got another about 8-10 different locations. We met, for example, met with some informally, some business people. We'll be doing so again. We'll be calling for public submissions. We hope to have some consultations also in the Suvarnasori corridor, because as you would expect that people in different locations in Fiji have different priorities, how they've been affected by COVID-19. As also announced by Honourable Minister Praveen Kumar Bala, that there will also be a review of the wages and salaries. As you know, that the last time that we had the review of the national minimum wage was back in 2018 or so. And we at that point in time said we'll do a review of the minimum wage every 2 years. Obviously, COVID-19 came along. We could not do a review of the wages and salaries during the COVID, but now the borders have opened up, so it's a good opportunity. As we've also highlighted that the worldwide inflation actually has increased significantly, predominantly because of lack of raw materials, and also freight costs have gone up significantly. I mean, in some destinations, the freight where a container may have cost $5,000 is now costing $15,000. So those freight costs will be passed on to the consumer ultimately. So it is an appropriate time essentially to ensure that we review the wages and salaries to see how they can keep up with the inflationary impact of a COVID-19 pandemic world, which is, as we can see, is now getting off the rails of a pandemic, becoming more of an epidemic. So we are doing that review, and obviously in the mini budget we'll be looking at various other measures as to what we can do, things that are within our control. So the wages review has already started. We understand that there'll be public consultations very soon. We're using the same professor as the last time, who is based in Australia. We understand that he'll be in the country this week at some point in time. And we hope to have the review completed before the mini budget is actually announced. Okay, any other questions?
Just one last.
Sure.
So, can you confirm whether the resolution could be reached and the new USP is about to commence in relation to the grant?
We had discussions today also with, as you know, that the head of the Pacific desk at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Australia, DFAT, is currently in the country. And as we stated to him, that Fiji's position is that there needs to be an investigation, independent investigation, in respect of the allegations pertaining to many of the administrative and financial functioning within at USP. And until and unless that is done, Fiji is not going to contribute any grants to USP. However, as you know, that Fiji does contribute to USP by paying fees of those people who are recipients of the Toppers Scholarship and those people who are in TELS. We have in excess of about $100 million has been disbursed to USP, through those schemes. So USP is still the beneficiary of the fees being paid by the Fijian government on behalf of Fijian students studying there. But in respect of the grant, obviously those are the conditions that we have set, and so far we have not seen any inclination on the part of the USP administration to have an independent assessment.